Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today to do this thing we call Hands-On Apologetics, where we learn how to share, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And, man, this week is rolling here in the dojo. I have a great lineup, very diverse subjects. For example, we had our good friend Ken Litchfield here Monday talk about the church that Jesus left behind. Then Tuesday, the 21st, we had Carlo Broussard from Catholic Answers fame, master apologist. That man's amazing, and he was helping us to answer the Protestant challenge against prayers to the saints. Then, of course, yesterday, the 22nd, we had our very good friend Steve Ray on the show. I've known Steve for years. Actually, I knew Steve back when he was still Protestant. I was fortunate enough to be there the day that he and his family came into the Catholic Church, and we've been good friends ever since. And man, I'm always learning from Steve. And yesterday we talked about Elijah and Elisha and just diving into Scripture. Today we're going to change gears, and we're going to have also a favorite of the show, Pat Flynn of Chronicles of Strength. Pat Flynn, as you know, is a convert from atheism. In fact, I'm going to have him tell us a little bit about his journey. It's been a little while since he's been on. And the man is just amazing when it comes to it, explaining the proofs of God, knowing all the intricacies of theistic proofs. Because, let's face it, folks, trying to prove the existence of God, it's difficult because you have to jump into the realm of philosophy. And to do that, you have around certain basic philosophical community and others. So it's a brave apologetic, no doubt. And Pat has really the dojo on the other side of the break. Also, by the way, tomorrow, the 24th, good friend, master apologist William Albrecht comes into the dojo. I know many of you are big fans of William. The guy has debated more than pretty much everybody I know, which says a lot, because I know people like Carl Keating and Pat Madrid, and man, he has debated more than anybody I know. He's going to come on. We're going to talk about Mary. And, that's a final great switch up for the whole week, since it's such a diverse topics. We're going to talk about Mary as Ark of the New Covenant tomorrow. So, folks, if you know somebody who's struggling with Mary, you know somebody who maybe doesn't think that Marian doctrine is rooted in church history or Scripture, that's the program you want to tell them about, to tune in tomorrow. And that's what we're going to do. So, big week here at Hands-On Apologetics, and I want to welcome all of you watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. Hey, Ricky. Hey to the rest of the gang, I could say. I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and via podcast around the world through our flagship website, Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Of course, you can also access the programs through YouTube, other platforms as well, or our handy-dandy phone app. Thank you, everybody. And also, I want to thank everybody for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please think about subscribing to Hands-On Apologetics, because that's a great thumb up for the show, and it helps our ministry and also helps us make ourselves a little bit more visible. And with the COVID crisis, in many ways, it is a burden, but it's also an opportunity for us to evangelize from the comfort of our own home. Evangelize on our phone or computer or wherever you watch the show. Just tell people who need it. 26151. Also, the address is questions@apologetics.com. And, I haven't even mentioned what we're going to do for our exercises for the first segment. As you know, folks, we do critical thinking skills every episode. So if you're a constant listener to Hands-On Apologetics, you are going to be trained and equipped to be able to explain the faith and also defend it, to spot bad arguments. And part of that program is learning basic fallacious arguments, which we call finding the fallacy. Every episode we look at informal fallacy. Today's informal fallacy, by the way, is the appeal to the stone. And also another component to defending the historic faith is to learn about early church fathers, because they are eyewitnesses to the early Christian faith. So without further ado, why don't we jump into our finding the fallacy, which is the appeal to the stone. It's a logical fallacy that consists in dismissing a statement as absurd, invalid, incorrect, without giving proof of its absurdity. Appealing to the stone is fallacious because it fails to address the merits of the claim in dispute. And the strange name of appeal to the stone, by the way, there's interesting background. It comes from a supposed debate between Samuel Johnson and George Brown. Of his position that material things exist, but he doesn't really address the issue. Well, actually, personally, I think he does. He's appealing to just common sense. I think there actually is a little bit more of a deeper refutation by kicking this stone, but nevertheless, that's how this fallacy got its name, the appeal to the stone. So beware of it, folks. And let's see. Let's jump to the mid-early church father for today, who is Quadratus, who flourished around AD 125. Of Quadratus, there is no information whatever beyond that which is found in the church historian Eusebius, who says of him, quote, "When Trajan had reigned for 19.5 years, Hadrian succeeded to his sovereignty, and it was to him that Quadratus addressed the treaty, prizing an apology of our religion, because some wicked men attempted to trouble us. It is still extant and in the hands of the brethren. In fact, we ourselves have a copy. From it, we can see a clear proof of his intellect and of his apostolic orthodoxy." Now, Hadrian ruled between 117 AD and 138 AD. But we can actually have a more narrow range of dates for his work. Since Quadratus was a native of Asia Minor, it's possible he was the same Quadratus mentioned elsewhere in Eusebius, who was a disciple of the apostles. Hadrian visited Asia Minor in 123 or 124 AD, and again in 129. So no doubt it was one of these two visits that Quadratus's apology was presented to him, with the identification of Quadratus as the apologete of Asia Minor, with Quadratus, the apostolic disciple of Asia Minor, is far from certain according to Jurgen's faith of the early fathers. Tradition makes of Quadratus the exegete and apostolic father, simply because he wrote the treaty, so therefore he is an apostolic father. But Jurgens also cautions that we shouldn't identify with the other Quadratus, also known as Saint Quadratus, who was a bishop in Athens around the time of Marcus Aurelius in AD 161 to 180. So the fragment, by the way, if you want to read it, it's found in Eusebius's Church History. Let me read the fragment for you. Quadratus reveals an early date in which he lived when he relates the following, which is in his own words, quote, "The works of the Savior are ever present, for they are true. Those who were cured and those who were raised from the dead were seen not only while being cured or while being raised, but they were ever present, not only while our Savior dwelt among us, but also for a considerable time after he departed. In fact, Some of them have survived to our own time, unquote. And that's a very important piece of datum, especially if he's written around 123, 129 AD. And it points out that the New Testament is preeminently verifiable to anybody in the first century, even the beginning of the second century. Why? Because, people got cured, but that wasn't the end of the story, right? Villages knew these people for years. They probably knew people growing up. They knew the extent of their injury. And then Jesus comes, instantaneously heals them. They're still hanging around the village, and they lived on for a number of years after Jesus. So, the evidence of the healings and purported miracles and exorcism, all that stuff was in living memory of the early church for a long time. And anybody wanted to check it out and verify it, well, Quadratus tells us you could do it, even in his own day. All right, coming up next, Master Apologist Pat Flynn. We're going to be talking about how to think about God. Stay tuned, folks.
Genesis 1:27 says, God created man in his own image. Male and female he created them. According to Pope St. John XXIII, it is not true that some human beings are by nature superior and others inferior. All human beings are equal in their natural dignity. May God help us to look upon everyone as a person created in his image and likeness, and treat everyone the same without favoritism or prejudice.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is?
Will it be a boy?
Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773.
Most powerful radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. And we're going to dive into the field of theistic apologetics today, looking at how to think about God. And to help us do that, we have our good friend, Master Apologist Pat Flynn with us. Pat Flynn, of course, is the host of the Pat Flynn Show, which covers everything from fitness and mental health to business and writing to philosophy and theology. He's the best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach, musician, entrepreneur, and also he expounds on the theory of generalism, a theory applicable to each and every one of us. And you can check out all the great stuff Pat does at chroniclesofstrength.com. And Pat Flynn, welcome to Hands-On Apologetics.
It is a pleasure to be here, Gary. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, you know what? It was a lot of fun to be able to chat with you and your wife and family and a couple days ago. So thank you so much for making the trip.
Yeah, we had an absolute blast. A lot of good conversation, some awesome ribs. If anybody listening hasn't had a chance to taste Gary's ribs yet, then then you're missing out. Those were a real treat, Gary. So no, it was a joy. Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, hey, I'm known for my ribbing, so thank you very much. But Pat, it's been a little while since you've been on the show. Would you mind just giving us just a real quick snippet of your background? Because this, arguing about God's existence, this was part of the air that you breathed for a number of years, hasn't it?
Right. Yeah. This is sort of fresh in my mind. I was recently on Matt Fradd's channel sharing this story, but I'll give the condensed version here, and then if anybody wants to hear the full thing, you can go check it out on YouTube. But the short story is this: I was baptized Catholic, had a very nominal upbringing. I fell away from the faith at a fairly early age. I sort of had my faith like most, I would say, immediately challenged around the sixth grade. In sixth grade science class, we were learning about Big Bang cosmology. Just the sketches of it as you would as a sixth grader. But I remember just immediately detecting some type of tension or conflict with what I remember being taught in, first or second grade Sunday school. And I'm sure people could have given me decent answers if I would have went looking for them, but I really didn't. So instead, I just kind of allowed those seeds of doubt to grow over time. Various influences in my life led me eventually to reading writers who were very antagonistic to religion, people like Mark Twain, H.L. Mencken. Eventually, I got into some of the old atheists and existentialists proper, like Nietzsche, and that really colored my worldview for a very long time. Eventually, however, as I got deeper into the world of metaphysics, I just came to a fundamental impasse and realized I just don't think that this worldview, this sort of reductive, physicalist, materialist, atheistic worldview, really can work. That it's explanatorily adequate in any way that I think it has to be, and that caused me to want to seriously reconsider my worldview, and I kind of went back and decided to reinvestigate and spend time with many philosophers who I may have been, had a passing familiarity with, from kind of intro to philosophy courses, but no real significant depth. Plato, Aristotle, Boethius, Augustine, and then, once you kind of hit Aquinas and the contemporary Thomists, they grip you, with their natural theology, and you start to become, at least I did, very intrigued with that branch of metaphysics of, can we really give a metaphysical demonstration or philosophical argument for God? So that really absorbed my interest for a very long time. I eventually became convinced that we can do that, and that the arguments for God, the traditional ones so far as they go, are good. Maybe we need to tweak them here or there and respond to some contemporary objections, but they're good arguments. They really do get us to the God of classical theism. And so that, I kind of sometimes joke, I guess it's not a very funny joke, but I say it anyways, I was something of a Thomist before I was a Catholic. But, once you kind of reach that position, it's hard to ignore the religious claims. And then the rest is just a matter of, well, could this be true as well? Could the Catholic Church be true? And here I am, right? So obviously I answered in the affirmative.
Yeah, here you're on Hands-On Apologetics defending God's existence. Remarkable story, and you certainly did the homework. And was that talking to you about what topic we could talk on? You mentioned the ebook that you just recently put out. Yes, this ebook. And what this is it's really just a snippet from a larger book project I've been working on. I feel like I'm working on like 5 or 6 different projects, some feedback from people who want to have an early look as well. So this is, again, it's a snippet from a larger project, but it is a presentation of a Thomistic-ish kind of contemporary argument for God's existence is what's in, and it's called How to Think About God. So that's what that's about. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the title sounded so familiar. Then I realized that it was Mortimer Adler had a book by that title, How to Think About God. Is there some sort of are you bouncing that off Adler's arguments, or?
Yeah, so I'm horribly unoriginal is the first point. But no, there's actually a good reason for that. One is that I think his book is wrong. I think that he gets the metaphysics me on that. He's got this book about God. He kind of sort of rejects a number of the traditional arguments of God, and he kind of brings in this idea or this principle of existential inertia. And we can maybe talk about that later. But I think that betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of the sort of deeper metaphysics of Thomas Aquinas, which really leaves no room for anything like existential inertia. And then Adler kind of formulates I would say kind of a contemporary argument based on like a principle of explanation of why even if existential inertia exists, we still need God to explain why any contingent thing or this particular universe exists at all rather than nothing. So I think that argument is still fine as far as it goes. So I would actually now say that his main
he felt that the proofs for God's existence kind of fell short, but I think it was the cosmological argument that he thought was really the silver bullet. And am I correct on that? It's been a while since I read it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And again, he kind of comes down on this objection from existential inertia, which is really kind of a very confused objection. We can maybe try and work through it later in the context of the argument that I give to see why I think it fails. But he kind of pulls it out from I guess the general law of inertia to some type of metaphysical principle that things, once they're brought into existence, will continue along in existence unless something specifically knocks them out of existence. And what he's denying is that there needs to be any sort of divine sustaining activity or concurrence that God, maybe he can kind of put something in existence, but there's no need for God to do any work after that. That this sort of principle. Now what sustains that principle is, of course, another interesting question of, well, what would make that principle the case? What would actualize that principle, even if it was a principle? I think is something that he leaves unexamined. But that's primarily his objection. And yeah, he's kind of going through the legs of cosmological arguments with that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. Well, let's see. We have a few minutes. Maybe you can kind of give us an overview of your approach, and then on the other side of the break, we can go through each of the premises. Yeah,
let's do it. So I'll probably give a condensed version. Right, that has its existence independent. So that'll be the first step. The second step will be to show that whatever this thing is, it has to be a pure act of existence, existing through itself. And then an implication of that will be that it has to be utterly unique. It can only be one and only one. And then the condensed version will just do 3 steps, is that this thing will have to be purely and fully actual. And I think once you have those at least minimal 3 steps in place, you'll have all that you need to begin unlocking the divine attributes, to start unpacking things like omnipotence, simplicity, omniscience, and so on and so forth, that you can really arrive at a very robust monotheism and the God of specifically classical theism as well.
Yeah, very good. Now, for those who aren't
is restricted. Then answer maybe some questions about itself from within itself, but at some point you're going to hit some type of limit of intelligibility of why this thing exists in the way that it exists rather than not. And so we're going to have to go beyond the limits of the being of this thing to find an adequate explanation for it. So I think one way to think of contingency is just as some type of reality that is restrictedly intelligible. It can't account for itself just from within itself.
Very good. And then, of course, the opposite would be non-contingent, which would basically be completely intelligible in and of itself without going outside of itself.
Right, a necessary being. And that is I think an important question. Is we can run some arguments to get to a necessary being, and say, well, as we'll try to do here in a minute, and that there must be such a necessary being. But then we still want to go further. We want to think, well, why is this being necessary? Like, what is necessary? It is necessary, and maybe we can answer some of those when we get back.
All right. Hey, great cliffhanger. I hear the music coming up. Perfect timing. We are chatting with Master Apologist Pat Flynn. How to think about God. Coming up on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com, and we're talking about proofs for existence of God, how to think about God. Actually, before we dive into the premises, really quick, Pat, I think a lot of us need to refocus what we imagine these proofs are doing. We're not trying to prove that there is a being that exists that's kind of supernatural, dwelling.
Questions intrinsically, unrestrictedly eligible. The explanatory buck stops here, and it must be for a principled reason. So God is going to be unlike anything else. So it helps to have right expectations. Expectations would be that things might get a little bit strange when we start thinking about God, because God is so radically different. And people sometimes will work through some of these arguments and will get to some conclusions that they'll think are strange, like impassibility or immutability. But then I try to remind them, well, why should we expect that God isn't going to be a little bit strange? Like, if anything else, we already know that God is strange from certain other commitments that a lot of people are willing to accept, such as God is the cause of everything else, but God himself is uncaused. Well, that itself is strange, right? So why would the strangeness just stop with one thing? And so those are maybe just some things to keep in mind as we move along. So that way, when we hit some conclusions that might be a little bit jarring at first, this is that. But that's where the arguments lead. So
yeah, if it wasn't jarring, it wouldn't be God. Right.
Right. I would be suspicious if it was easy and like fantastically similar to us. Thinkers like and Robert Spitzer. I think it's handy and it's broad enough that it can accommodate, most understandings of causality, whether classical or quantum. So we don't need to get into the nitty gritties of that. So start with some definitions. Okay, what's a conditioned reality? Again, people might want to just think of this as a caused reality, but here's how I'll define it. A conditioned reality is any reality which exists because and only because conditions or circumstances external to it have been fulfilled. So example candidates might be electrons, Gloria Steinem, Whitesnake albums, you name it, right? Most of the things we think about. And the idea that if we were to kind of delete the conditions, the conditioned reality would cease to exist, or it never would have began to exist to begin with. So take me, for example. So I am a conditioned reality because I depend on, and that's another way to think of a conditioned reality. It's sort of a dependent reality. I depend on not just the prior existence of having procreating parents, even though I try not to think about that too much, but the ongoing existence of things like electromagnetic fields, the Earth's atmosphere, RNA, DNA instructions, cellular activity, you name it. So some of these conditions explain what brought me into existence, but others explain what keeps me in existence. And notice that pretty much everything I've pointed to does not have any external conditions to exist. It's in virtue of itself. It would exist through itself and not through something else or in virtue of something else. And so this would not be a dependent reality, but whatever this thing would be an independent reality. So it would be radically different than most things that we or think about. So I think it's very clear that at least conditioned realities exist, right? Things come into existence, things pass out of existence, things clearly stand in dependency relations to other things, even if they don't come into existence or go out of existence. And I think that it's like, if you can just grant me this, then we can probably move on to the more interesting stuff. I can't really think of people who would seriously deny that there are conditioned or contingent realities. Certainly, they shouldn't be operating heavy machinery. But an important thing to note is that conditioned and unconditioned, that's a complete disjunction, meaning it covers the entire range of possibilities for being, right? So, if thing is in a conditioned reality, it's going to by default be an unconditioned reality, or vice versa. There's no other alternative here, and that's going to be important going forward. First step, and I'll try and speed up here, is to just wonder if all of reality could collectively be a conditioned reality. I'm going to argue no. There has to be at least one unconditioned reality to explain why anything exists at all, or at least one uncaused reality. I'll trot this out quick, Gary, and then we can jam on it a bit. So I would argue as follows, right? If there were not at least one unconditioned or uncaused reality in the totality of reality, the collection of every, then totality of reality would be collectively a conditioned reality. It would be collectively conditioned in its existence, right? But if the totality of reality collectively were conditioned in its existence, it would then be awaiting causation via the fulfillment of conditions beyond itself to exist. But here's the problem. Beyond everything, there's nothing, right? There can be no cause beyond everything. There could be no conditions to be fulfilled beyond everything, because by definition, we're talking about the totality of reality. My friend Josh Rasmussen calls it the blob of everything real, whatever that is, right? There can be nothing outside of it, right? Because if there was something outside of it, it would be in it, because it's the blob of everything real. So if the totality of reality were collectively conditioned in its existence, if it were collectively a conditioned reality, then the totality of reality, just everything, would be awaiting the fulfillment of conditions beyond itself in order to exist. Now, the problem with that is that a conditioned reality whose conditions are unfulfilled is equivalent to nothing. And we're really postulating something whose conditions for existence are not only unfulfilled, because there's nothing beyond the totality of reality, but are in principle unfulfillable. They cannot, in principle, be fulfilled. So it's standing in a dependency relation. It requires the fulfillment of conditions beyond itself, but there can be no fulfillment of these conditions under this hypothesis. So we're kind of left with a dilemma here, right? We can either accept that nothing exists, that all of reality stands in this dependency relationship, which can never be satisfied because there's nothing beyond everything which could fulfill the conditions to cause reality. Or and we think that at least some do exist, the firm that they're which I think everybody should, then we have to read the hypothesis. And the opposite of there being only conditioned realities would be that there has to be at least one. Now, there might be more, but there has to be at least one unconditioned or uncaused reality.
Okay. Let me throw an objection out. Someone could say, well, why does it have to be external to reality? Why can't it be internal? Like, why can't all of reality be dependent on A causing B, which causes C, which causes A again? And all,
right.
A, B, and C are all within reality.
Yeah, so we have kind of two different objections. I want to take them both. What you're throwing in there is a causal loop. And I think most people reject causal loops for a good reason, is in the sense that you're going to kind of invite the absurdity of something having to be prior to itself in a causal loop, right? So if A causes B and B causes C and then C causes A, when you really unpack that, you're going to get A kind of pulling itself up by its existential bootstraps, right? Kind of pulling itself into existence, that it will have to be in an ontological and explanatory sense prior to itself. So you kind of get the absurdity of of self-causation, right? And you can run all kinds of paradoxes with this, with time travel. And there's actually some interesting arguments against why time travel probably isn't even metaphysically possible because of these causal loops. So, but we can argue it from a different way, which is from the idea that you could have just kind of an infinite series of caused realities or conditioned realities, and show that this can't be the case, and it doesn't matter how you arrange it. You can arrange it in a line, you can arrange it in a loop or a circle, you could arrange it in layered matrices. You're going to run into the same problem. So here's probably the easiest way to maybe think about this. If you want to kind of postulate, an infinite number of conditioned realities, right, but no one unconditioned reality, what you're going to get is just a sort of stack of dependent things, or a collection of dependent things that are still never going to be able to have their conditions for existence fulfilled. So, for example, if thing A were dependent upon thing B, for example, and thing B were dependent upon thing C, and so on and so forth ad infinitum, well, then what you're doing is you're just infinitely frustrating thing A from ever coming to exist, right? Because there's always one more move we can make, one more, set of conditions that need to be fulfilled before thing A ever comes to exist. So to kind of push the objection of sort of an infinite regress is really just to say that we have an unachievable fulfillment of conditions for the existence of whatever the thing is in question, right? That's really what we're saying. So we're going to get, but what we're going to say is if thing A exists, we've achieved the unachievable. And we're going to get, I think, a pretty straightforward contradiction there. Now, you can just put that in a circle. And then the question is, does that circle end or does it go on forever? If it ends, then whatever that terminating condition is either going to be nothing or it's going to be that necessary reality. If it doesn't end, then you're in the same problem.
Beautiful. Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him, I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great. And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio."
Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Healthcare news today seems to be coming from everywhere and everyone. It's confusing at least and untrustworthy at the worst. Dr. Aceta is a faithful Catholic in the Kern County community. He is trustworthy, well-researched, and will only give expert opinion on matters in his own specialty. Catholic teaching at its entirety is of utmost importance to Dr. Aceta. Give Dr. Aceta a call for your obstetrics and gynecological needs at 661-695-6617.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
Welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist Pat Flynn. And by the way, if you missed the first couple segments, you want to tune in because Pat is putting on a clinic. The sensei tried to sneak a fastball through it past him, but you knocked it out of the park, Pat, and only in 2 minutes. And you also kind of employed Dr. Seuss terminology as well, which I'm very impressed. So, thing one and thing two, thing A, thing B.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, it's all these kids' books that I read. It creeps into my metaphysics,
it comes
I
in
guess.
handy.
Right?
Comes
Yeah.
in handy. Okay, so all of reality can't be this ball of conditioned reality, right? It all has to depend on something pointing outside of itself. But like you said, the only thing outside of reality is nothing. I mean, it's unreality. It's not real.
Yeah, that's right. And, we use I guess we use a lot more words than maybe we had to. I mean, just think, could there be a cause outside of reality? And the answer is no, obviously not, right? So there could be no cause of everything, right? We're really just saying that not everything can have a cause in the simplest terms, which is funny because one of the, I guess, common objections or straw man caricatures of theistic arguments is the notion that we rely on some type of dubious causal premise that everything has a cause. But we're actually starting off with completely the opposite of that. We're saying, no, not everything can have a cause. Otherwise, we're going to get a contradiction of fact, right? We're going to be led to this absurdity that nothing exists. So, yeah. And I also want to emphasize that this first step of the argument is something that many atheists can and do agree with, right? Because we haven't gotten to God yet. We're just saying that there has to be some aspect of reality that is radically different to explain why anything exists rather than nothing. And that's, that's not like the Catholic faith right there, right? That's just the first step. So, and this seems to be an area where a lot of progress has been made in the kind of philosophy of religion and metaphysics literature. Like, this is something that many atheists and theists actually agree on, that, yeah, there has to be at least some necessary reality. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very good. So where do we move from there then? How do we get from there to classical theism?
Right. So I'm going to make two moves here. I'm going to argue that whatever else this thing is, it has to be a pure act of existence existing through itself. And then once we understand and appreciate that, it can be one and only one. And then it's going to have to be fully actual. And then I think once those moves are in place, so we've got this we call it the bridge problem, right? Or this gap problem is probably a better way of putting it. We need to make a bridge for the gap. And the gap is unconditioned reality and God? How do we bridge that gap? And so those are the two moves I'm going to make. So let's go. I'll try and speed up here so we can hopefully get through the whole thing. So I'm going to argue that this unconditioned reality must be a pure act of existence existing through itself. Why? Okay, well, let's think about it like this. Whatever else this unconditioned reality is, it must be an act of existing through itself. For one thing, if the unconditioned reality were not actual or active or present or included in reality, then it would need to be activated. It would need to be caused, and then it would therefore be conditioned, which makes no sense. And if we're not existing through itself, then it would exist in virtue of something else, again, making it caused and conditioned. So that makes no sense. So it has to be an act of existence existing through itself. Now, I want to also argue that it has to be a pure act of existence existing through itself. Let's set another hypothetical, right? So a pure act of existing itself, then there would have to be some part or dimension or factor within this reality that was different from the act of existing through itself, right? But if there were a part or a dimension or a factor or whatever within the unconditioned reality that was different from the act of existence existing through itself, it's different from the act of existing through itself, then by default, it's not the act of existing through itself, which only leaves us with one other option. It has to be something that's caused or conditioned in its existence. So whatever else this thing is, it has to be a completely pure act of existence existing through itself. And this is going to, I think this is going to be a good and powerful move for the theist, because this is also going to quickly get us to uniqueness. Because if there can be no differentiating factor that is relevant to this thing, then there can never be more than one, right? There's no, if in order to have a different part or something like that, it's going to have to be a caused reality. So there's no way that we can have multiple instances of this thing without some sort of differentiating feature. But since it's not susceptible to that, it's going to be radically and utterly unique. So it has to be just a pure act of existence existing through it.
But really, they aren't identical because they are in two different locations. So if you wipe out any kind of differentiation, you're ultimately it coincides to only one thing. So there could be only one unconditioned reality.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So whether you want to posit differences and restrictions to space-time points or temporality or mode of behavior, whether it's like acting like an electron or something like that, you're going to run into the same issue. There's no way that we can get anything that would make this thing less than pure, given the category of the type of thing that this is. So it's not going to be composite, which we'll argue for later, which will give us divine simplicity. It's not going to be susceptible to multiplication. And here I'm really just borrowing insights from Aquinas's sort of famous argument in the De Ante, where he argues that, okay, hypothetically, if there is, something whose essence just is existence itself, then there can only be one of those things, right? There's no way that we're going to be able to get any sort of differentiating. It's not going to be susceptible to multiplication, not in the way, he uses the specific categories of genus and species, but I just wanted to keep it more kind of general and broad for this conversation. But this is really just a sort of classic and perennial Thomistic insight that I'm using here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so if it's purely one, and there's no aspect of it whatsoever that is conditioned, how does that lead us to the next step of pure act?
Right. So let's bring in some of the old, Aristotelian Thomistic terminology at this point, and the distinction that it goes back at least to Aristotle between actual being and potential being, right? And this was kind of how Aristotle is responding to various puzzles and paradoxes regarding change, how change is a real feature of the world. And the distinction that comes out is that we have actual being, and that's something that's sort of intensely present or active in reality. It's a real current state of affairs capable of producing an effect. But then we also have, sort of another aspect or layer of being, if you will, which is potential being or possible being or just potentiality, right? Where something exists only passively or dormantly, which must be caused or brought into existence by something beyond itself. And as we'll see, all potentiality is ultimately grounded in actuality. So just to kind of give a brief example, right? So I am actually 165 pounds, but I'm potentially 175 pounds. I know that because I've been 175 pounds before. Now, but to become 175 pounds, certain necessary conditions will have to be fulfilled to increase my weight, such as the ingestion of a consistently surplus number of calories, like your famous ribs, for example, Gary. So some causes beyond myself are required to actualize my inherent weight potential, which exists only sort of latently within my nature of being a human person. Whereas obviously being 175 pounds, it doesn't exist latently within the nature of everything, like an electron, for example, right? So potencies are grounded in actualities. That's just an important thing to keep in mind. So now, all right, so how do we get to purely and fully actual? So quickly reiterate the sort of conclusion reached in the previous stage, that given the necessity of an unconditioned reality to ultimately ground the existence of everything else, right? This is where the sort of the metaphysical buck has to stop, right? This unconditioned reality could not be merely or even partly potential, right? Otherwise, it's going to need some external cause to activate it or cause it, right? But then again, that just reinvites the contradiction, since we're then saying there's an unconditioned cause that requires the fulfillment of conditions beyond itself. So there can be no metaphysical part in this uncaused reality, like me being potentially bigger, because then that part would need itself a cause or something to actualize it. Again, bringing the same sort of trouble that we've been dealing with. And if that would be the case, then this whatever this thing is, it's sort of a composite of potentiality and actuality. There'd need to be something more fundamental to actualize that potential. All right. Now, if we say that there's a potential part still in this unconditioned reality, because somebody might say, okay, that makes sense. I'll grant you that, right? Maybe there's something more fundamental. Okay, but maybe there's a potential part that just can't be actualized, right? Like maybe it's just like mostly actual or like 96% actual, and it's got this potential part, but it can't be actualized. There's nothing more fundamental, and it can't actualize it itself. Well, what about that option? I've heard this before. And I think when we think about this, we're going to realize that it's not really a potential part, that this can't possibly be the case, because if we're saying that there's some potential that cannot ultimately have the conditions fulfilled to actualize it, because there's nothing more fundamental to bring it about, then it's not really a potential at all, right? For anything to even be a potential, it has to, in principle, be actualizable. So if you're saying that right, it can't be actualizable, then it's just you're talking about literally nothing. You're using the word potential, but you're talking about nothing. And since there can only be one pure active existence existing through itself, whatever most fundamental level will have to be by default or high any conditions fulfilled for its own existence. So it's not going to make any sense to try and attribute any sort of potentiality to this thing, because as soon as you do, you're either just going to reinitiate the causal regress, and you're going to need to get something that's fully actual, or if you try to take that second option, it's just going to result in you talking about nothing but just calling it a potentiality. And once you have that in place, a fully and purely actual, unconditioned reality that is utterly unique, I think you're pretty much ready to just start unloading all the divine attributes of classical theism.
Very good. And right on the dot as far as time. That's so impressive. Pat, where can people go to get a hold of your stuff?
Right. So this little ebook is called How to Think About God. It's on Amazon for $1. Like I said, if you want to save the $1, you email me. I'll send you a free PDF of it. But if you enjoy it, maybe consider leaving a review or something like that as well.
Very good. All right. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Always a joy, Gary. Thank you.
All right. Pat Flynn, everybody. chroniclesofstrength.com. And man, the hour is flowing. Pat did such a great job. It just flew. Coming up next, High Impact. And you with Terry and Jessica Show. Thank you so much for listening, and God willing, we'll be back again tomorrow to do this thing we call Hands on Apologetics. Bye-bye, everybody.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.